All right, hello class. Welcome back to Ethics, Philosophy 2306. Right now we're doing Chapter 6. This is a non-consequentialist theories, and the title of the chapter is Do Your Duty, which I also think is aptly named. It does kind of capture what non-consequentialist theories are basically all about, is doing your duty, your moral duty. So remember that on Chapter 5 we talked about consequentialist theories. And for these theories, these moral theories, the rightness or the wrongness of an action is totally dependent on the consequences of such action. What are the effects, in other words, of such action? Or what rules, right? If you're doing a rule utilitarian, what rule your action follows under is going to maximize benefits for everyone involved. Right? These are the consequentialist theories. So now we're moving on to the opposite, which is non-consequentialist. So as you might guess, with the name of the title of the theory, non-consequentialist, it's not about the consequences. So what is it going to be about? Non-consequentialist, or also known as the ontologist moral theories, um, stipulates that the rightness or the wrongness of an action can never be measured as such a variable as outcomes. Instead, rightness derives not from the consequences of the action, but from its very nature of that act itself. In other words, rightness or wrongness is dependent on what properties or what characteristics that action has that makes it right or wrong. Okay, so it's about the action itself, not about the consequences at all. So according to, for example, Immanuel Kant, one of the most famous proponents of the ontologist moral theory, he says that an action is right or wrong not because of what it produces, but because of what it is. So what it is, right? That's what determines if it's right or wrong for the ontology. All right. So let's talk about Immanuel Kant a little bit, because he's the one that really formulated this ontologist moral theory really, really well. So Immanuel Kant, he was born in 1724. He died in 1804. Considered not just one of the greatest moral philosophers of the modern era, but just the greatest philosopher of the modern era, period. I'm not a Kantian myself. I really don't follow his philosophy, but I definitely understand his intervention in the history of the development of philosophy and philosophical thought in the Western world. So I do understand how important he is. Even though I disagree with some of his findings, I do have to deal with him. Every time I do my own writing or my own thinking, I do have to go back to Kant and deal with him. All right. But anyways, born in 1724, 1804, right at the cusp of the Enlightenment period, when things are really moving away from the world being understood in religious and mystical terms, and now the world being understood and arguably conquered via rationality and rational means, science, in other words. Right? So this is the triumph of science over religion and world history at this time period. As a matter of fact, sorry, I think I'm getting sick. But as a matter of fact, Immanuel Kant wrote this wonderful little essay, about 8 pages long or so, 10 pages, and it's called "What is Enlightenment?" And in this really short, sweet essay, if you just Google Kant, "What is Enlightenment?" I'm sure the first hit will be the PDF of that. And you should read it. It's really cool because it really does explain, describe what enlightenment is. Right? He does answer that question that he raises in his title, and he also kind of like gives you like the justifications of why we should be rational over religious. But he also gives you like the downfalls to rational. It's a really wonderful little essay. So anyways, long story short, this guy Kant, that's the way he pronounces, not Kant, it's Kant, because he's German, whatever. I don't care really. Um, he's all about reason, but he's afraid that being so rational, we're losing the insights that religious gave us for a moral life. So that's why he comes out with his moral theory of what he calls, or what we call actually, he never really called it this, but we called it after him, the Categorical Imperative. All right, a little bit more about Kant, because I think he is a fascinating philosopher. He never left his home of Königsberg, Prussia. He never traveled. He never felt the need to travel. He was like a philosopher's philosopher. So like on his off time, when he wasn't philosophizing, he was philosophizing. He never stopped doing philosophy. Fascinating character. Even though he was big ass nerd, basically, and he was very, very punctual. Like everything had to be on time for him. He had a very strict schedule. For instance, there's a story about him that the neighbors there in Königsberg, the townspeople, they didn't have to use watches. They didn't have to buy watches. So watches were a new invention back then, right? They didn't have to buy watches because they would just use Kant's daily strolls around the town to tell what time it was. So like in the morning he'll do a daily stroll, and in the evening he'll do another daily stroll around the town, just thinking, walking, and people would know like in the morning like, oh, it's got to be 6 in the morning. Here's Kant. Here he comes Kant, and his daily stroll. Or in the evening, oh, it's got to be 6:30 p.m. already. Here comes Kant in his daily stroll. So he was very punctual, right? He's very, again, all about rationality. Everything got to be really rational, on point, logically ordered. That was Kant. The only time that he was late for his morning stroll, it's a funny story here, is that he was reading David Hume one day, a Scottish philosopher from that time, part of the Enlightenment period as well. And David Hume, he's a proponent of skepticism that says that, rationality, irrationality, human beings just don't have the capacity to know what's really out there in the world. And that's the ideology or the philosophy known as skepticism. Skeptic. We're just skeptic. We just don't know really. Right? We might pretend to know with all this logical argumentation, philosophy, but at the end of the day, do we really know what's really out there, what's really real? David Hume, he says no. Humans are not just capable. We're not capable of doing that. Period. Right? Our brains are not developed to get to that level of knowledge. And that was the only time that Immanuel Kant was late, because he was fascinated by David Hume's writing, and he just stayed home reading it and just thinking about it. But besides that, he was always punctual. Another cool thing about Immanuel Kant, according to his neighbors and his biographers, is that he would throw the best parties ever in that town. So even though he was a big ass nerd, very punctual, right? Might think he's a square. Actually not. He had a very vibrant social life with his parties that he would host in his house. And his parties had schedule, actually. Imagine going to a party and you had like a schedule to follow. It's kind of weird, huh? But people loved it. And the schedule was like this. You go in, you get yourself some drinks, you meet people and stuff. Like so 1 hour or 2 hours of socializing and drinking. And then he'll pass out a piece of literature. Maybe like a news story from the time era, or a piece of poetry or something to read. And everybody in the party would read it, and then they would discuss it about drinking and socializing. And then they would debate, have argumentations. And then towards the end, the last part of the meeting was just party, just to relax again. But every party he hosted had that component of this reading and debate with his party goers. And apparently that was freaking cool. People loved it. People really loved it. So, right? Maybe we should start doing that at parties ourselves, right? Hand out some poetry and like let's force people to read and analyze it, debate, and then party again, right? That's kind of cool. Anyways, all right. So Kant, all about rationality, right? Enlightenment period, right? Rationality. no religion, right? So he's trying to find a moral law that is not going to depend on religion. So thus far, the authority figure of what is right and wrong has been religion, namely the Christian doctrine or religion, which is really natural law theory. And I'll explain natural law theory after we explain Kant. But natural law theory, actually, no, not natural law theory, I'm sorry, divine command theory. So divine command theory is just basically that whatever the divine, God, commands, that's what you should do. That's the right thing to do. Think about Euthyphro. Right? That was his vision of rightness and wrongness. Right? The same with Christianity. Right? They kind of adopted that Platonic view of natural law theory and gave it to God. Right? So whatever God commands, that's the right thing to do. And that was the authority of what is right and wrong. And Kant wanted to get away from that. Kant wanted to get away because he straight up didn't think that religion was rational. Right? It was really irrational. Right? It didn't have science behind it, basically. But he wanted to create a moral law, nonetheless. Right? We're not just going to get rid of morality, right? Because there is a so-called immoralist argument during this time period, even to today. The amoralist, so amoral means that you're not moral at all. So every time you see a in front of a word, so like apolitical, it means that you're not political at all. Or apathetic means that you don't have sympathy for anybody, just apathy. Right? So a is kind of like a negative prefix for the root word. So amoralist argument says that we don't need morality, that it's actually rational to choose to follow your moral duty or not. And I won't really go to the details of the amoralist argument, but this is something that Kant was trying to go against. Religion and this amoralist argument. Right? So basically, he wanted to rescue morality away from religion and away from the dismissal of rationality of morals and bring it back via reason, using just reason as the foundation of morality. Okay? Quite a big enterprise he set upon, and he was quite successful, I would argue. So reason, the foundation of morality. That's what he's trying to get. This is his whole enterprise here in the fundamental principles of the metaphysical morals, one of his first writings. For Kant, reason alone could lead us to understand what is right and what is wrong. Right? We don't need religion, right? And we don't need to dismiss morality outright, like rationalists were doing at that time. Right? Rationality itself is going to help us, it's going to guide us to reach the moral right action. So for him, we don't need to heed to utility, right? The consequences, to religion or tradition or authority. Just rationality is going to get us to the morally right action. The dictates of reason. Right? And why? And he says because each person, each individual in this world has a capacity for reason. Okay? To begin with. It's like one of his first premises. Each person has capacity for reason. And because of this, he or she is a sovereign in the moral realm. So a sovereign, they're independent. They are, each person, because of the capacity for reason, are sovereign and supreme judge of this moral realm of what morality demands. Okay? So according to Kant, what morality demands, what is right or what is wrong, this is enshrined, this is embedded, right? This is encased in the moral law. So for him, there's like a moral law out there that rationality, reason, is going to help us uncover or discover. Right? But for him, there's this moral law out there that's changeless, eternal, and universal. this body of rules, moral rules, that is changeless, eternal, and universal. And Immanuel Kant thinks that it's there somewhere, and we need to use reason to discover it, or to uncover this so-called moral law. So for Kant, therefore for Kant, any right action is one that is made in accordance to the so-called what he calls goodwill, to this reason unto this moral law. Right? So any action that is done out of goodwill is a rational action and is a morally right action, the goodwill. So the goodwill is a really important concept for Kant, not just for his ethics, but for his epistemology as well. But the goodwill is just your will to do your duty for duty's sake. Right? Your will to do right because it's the right thing to do, not because it's going to benefit somebody or everybody or yourself, as the utilitarians would argue, but just because a duty is your duty to do. That is a goodwill. When you do actions out of that logic, doing your duty for duty's sake. Hence the title of the chapter, this chapter 6, Do Your Duty. This is what Kant is essentially saying here. The most rational action and the most morally right action, because it follows rationality, is to do your duty for duty's sake. And I'll explain that more as we go along here. So, so to act in goodwill is to act not because you desire to act like that way. As a matter of fact, you might not desire to do that action, but you do it nonetheless out of goodwill because it is your duty to do that. Okay. So here will be a good time to give you some vocabulary words. All right. So here's a good time to make the distinction to define the distinction between hypothetical imperatives and categorical imperatives. Right. So between the hypothetical and the categorical. So hypothetical, I'm sure y'all heard of this before. Hypothetical, hypotheses. Right. It's something that might be or might not be the case. Right. A hypothetical imperative tells people what they should do to accomplish what they desire, what they want. So for instance, if I want to lose weight, I need to give myself a hypothetical imperative, like a rule myself, that I could follow or not follow, but I should follow if I do want to lose weight and start exercising. That's my rule. Begin exercising. Go to the gym now that it's open. That's a hypothetical imperative. I don't have to do it. I should do it because I desire to lose weight and stay fit and hopefully live longer, but I don't have to do it. You know what I mean? It's just hypothetical imperative. When I want to pass a test, midterm exam here for this class, I could study and watch these many lectures, or I could just take the test itself and hope for the best. All right, so these are hypothetical imperatives. Right? You don't have to do these. So there's no duty bound here. Right? There's no bindness to the duty of it here. It's just if we desire something, we set ourselves up these hypothetical imperatives to see if we could to help us reach that goal. So if you need money, you work for it. Right? You don't have to work, but you won't get money though, in this world we live in. Right? If you want orange juice, you go to the store and buy it, or you ask for it at the restaurant or whatever you're at. Right? So these are hypothetical imperatives. You don't have to get orange juice, right? But you want it, you ask for it, right? So these are hypothetical imperatives. These are commands or imperatives. Same word, command, imperative. To accomplish something, a goal that you desire, right? Which you don't have to do, but you probably should do. Right? Hypothetical imperatives. Right? In other words, we should obey such imperatives only if we desire the outcome specified. That's it. Right? And this we deal with it every single day. Right? Wake up, the alarm goes off in the morning, right? Hypothetical imperatives, man, should I wake up or should I put in snooze for 10 more minutes, right? Then it comes to a moment where the hypothetical imperatives becomes categorical, where it's not a if you want to or not, right? Hypothetical is if you want to or not. If you have a desired outcome, you might want to do those commands to get that outcome. That's hypothetical. But a categorical is basically when you like slept too long and you gotta get to work. It's your duty to get to work, right? You have to get up. You have no hypotheticals no more. You have to get up. It's your duty to get to work and to get there on time. All right, so a categorical imperative is a must. There's no exceptions for this. Right? You do that duty because it's your duty to do that duty. It tells us what we should do in all situations, regardless of our wants or needs. Even if I don't want to wake up and go to work, I have to go to work. That's my duty, right? And that's a categorical imperatives, right? It's pretty much like it's absolute. There's no iffy, leeway around here, like the hypothetical ones. So the difference between hypothetical, you want something, you do it. Categorical, you have to do it. Even if you don't want to do it, you have to do this duty, this command, this imperative. Okay. So an example of a categorical imperatives: right? Do not steal. Do not kill. Right? These you must follow. Right? These are duties you gotta follow. And why you gotta follow these? Because according to Kant, these duties, these categorical imperatives, these commands, are universal. They're unconditional, and they contain no stipulations. They're not contingent, not dependent on human desires or pretensions or preferences. Kant says that the moral law, right, that moral law out there that we want to discover, it's all consisted of these categorical imperatives. So basically, for Kant, what we're trying to do here is we're going to use our reason, our capacity to think rationally, to find out what are categorical imperatives and what are hypothetical imperatives. That's the enterprise he's trying to do here now, right? Right. So how can we derive these categorical imperatives? How do we use rationality? And he says, simple, guys. Follow this principle right here, the principle of universality. That's its first categorical imperative. The categorical imperatives, as we call them. So what is the categorical imperative? To find what we should do and what we should not do. To find the difference between the hypothetical ones and the categorical ones, and thus to find the moral law that we should follow, which is the categorical imperatives, is this principle. There's a couple of principles, but this is the first one that he comes up with. Or he argues that they're all the same principle, but different variations of the same thing. Well, here it is, the categorical imperative. The first one, the first categorical imperative. Act only on that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So act only on that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So this maxim, this general rule, this self-given rule. Right? So basically, these are the steps you gotta follow for this first categorical imperative. This is called the principle of universality. For every action, for every maxim, for every hypothetical imperative that you give yourself, imagine it, will it, that it becomes universal law. What does this mean? What the fuck does this mean? Right? It sounds kind of weird. Basically, all you have to do is ask these two questions. Devise this principle in the form of a question. So right before you do an action, any act, right before you do an act, ask yourself, what if everyone did this? That's willing it to become a universal law. What if everyone did this? The second question you should ask yourself is, how would you like it if I did that to you? This is the golden rule, right? That most religions have, right? Do unto others as you would like done unto you. Kant here capturing this golden rule and straying away his religious vestiges and giving it just reason as its foundation. So he doesn't call it the golden rule. He calls it um, the means ends principle, or the categorical imperative. That's the second imperative that we gotta follow. So questions you gotta ask yourself: to universalize your maxim, right? To test the first principle that Kant gives you. What if everyone did this? Right. So an example of, let's see, yesterday we're talking about in chapter 5 we're talking about the terrorists and the world leader, right? The staff general or whatever, right? You're the military leader of the U.S. and you need to capture this terrorist, and the only way to capture this terrorist is by capturing his family, killing his wife and 3 kids, and threatening the terrorist that we're going to kill the rest of his family if he doesn't turn himself in. Right? Under utilitarian lights, under utilitarian theory, utilitarian at least, that would be a right thing to do, to capture the family, kill the wife, 3 kids immediately, and then if he doesn't turn himself in the week, kill the rest of his family. Because hopefully then he turns himself in, right? Because you're going to save more people by killing just 12 people, his family, than what he's going to continue doing, the terrorists. Perhaps killing more thousands, hundreds of more. Right? So for utilitarians, that's the right thing to do. For Kant, you need to apply this categorical imperative. What if everybody did this? What if every military leader in the world began abducting, kidnapping terrorist families and killing them, killing the innocent families of terrorists? Right? Just because they're family members of terrorists doesn't mean they're actually part of it. They might not be. What about children? Right? Do children really have a choice in this? They're pretty innocent, no? Would argue, right? Common sense kind of says that these children of terrorists are just thrown into that world and have no choice, and thus are more or less more innocent than their father or mother that are terrorists themselves. Right? So is it fair? Kant would be like, okay, let's think about this. What if every military leader kidnapped terrorist families and killed them in order to capture the terrorists? Think about it. How would the world look like this? And wouldn't the military leaders look like terrorists themselves for kidnapping so many fucking families around the world? Right? So it would defeat the purpose of what they're doing. Right? There will be no difference between what the terrorists are doing and what the military leaders are doing. Killing the innocent people. Right? So that would be a self-defeating act. It's not rational. Thus, it's not morally right, according to Kant. Doesn't matter about the consequences. It's about the action itself. It's just not rational. It's not moral, according to this principle of universality. The first categorical imperative, which is, again, I'll read it out loud, according to, in Kant's own words, act only on that maxim through which you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. So, in other words, an action is morally right or permissible if, one, its maxim can be universalized, if everyone can consistently act on that action in similar situations, and 2, you would be willing to let that happen. So let me give you another a little bit of controversial here, a dilemma here, right? So homosexual sex, right? According under the Kantian light here, right, at first glance, homosexual sex is immoral, right? Because if you use the principle of universality, think about it. If you universalize homosexual sex. Everybody does that now. What would happen? There would be no more reproduction, right? People would not be able to reproduce because homosexual sex is not meant to reproduce, right? Thus, it's kind of like a self-defeating action. However, so would be celibacy or any action that says that it's wrong to have sex, right? So what if everybody had sex before they got married, right? Or what if everybody was celibate, right? You use the principle of universality. Universalize the law that you give yourself. So you're going to be celibate. You're going to be all morally right. And you want to avoid premarital sex. Sounds moral, right? Sounds like the right thing to do, right? But according to Kant, under the same argument, homosexual sex is immoral because it's irrational. The same thing with celibacy and not having sex until you're married. Because if you universalize that law, right, celibacy, for example, celibacy means that you're not having sex at all. If you universalize the law, the same thing happens as homosexual sex. There's a reproduction, the human species ends, and thus it's a self-defeating action, right? So what I'm trying to highlight here is how you can use these moral theories to support one view or another that really have nothing to do with each other. Okay, celibacy and homosexual sex, totally different things, almost opposite things, really. But Kant sees them as the same thing, rationally, right? So just be aware of how people use these theories to purport their own point of views. All right. So the golden rule, talked about that. Hypothetical, categorical imperatives. Talked about that. Principle of universality. And your maxim should be universalizable. Universalize your maxim. That's the first categorical imperatives. All right, let's move on to the other distinction between imperfect duties and perfect duties. So now that we apply this first, the categorical imperatives, says Kant, we should be able to distinguish between hypothetical imperatives and categorical imperatives. Or in other words, we should be able to distinguish between imperfect duties and perfect duties. What is the difference between those two? Imperfect duties are duties that there are exceptions to those duties. So an imperfect duty don't always have to be followed. They have exceptions. So for example, me wanting to stay in shape, right? That's a duty I need to do, right? Go to the gym and work out. But it's imperfect because there's exceptions. I might say, fuck it, I'm just too lazy to do that shit. Which happens too often, more often than I should do, right? But nobody's like, it's not immoral to do it, or right? You can't really say, right? I might be hurting myself in the long run, but is it a morally right or wrong action? It's kind of hard to determine it. And that's an imperfect duty, right? It's really, really similar to hypothetical imperatives. Excuse me. A perfect duty are those that you must absolutely follow without failure. Even if you hate doing that duty, or even if you don't desire to do that at all, you have to do it. So, for example, do not commit suicide. It's one of his, is a perfect duty. Do not kill yourself. Do not kill another person. Do not lie. Kant says that's a perfect duty. Don't break your promises. And these are duties that you absolutely must follow. Okay. Let's talk about the suicide part. Right? Why does Kant think that suicide is immoral? It's a wrong thing to do. For this, you need to understand the second categorical imperative, the means-ends principle. So what is the means-ends principle? Let me read it as Kant wrote it, right? So you get an idea. And as a matter of fact, on chapter 6, you have an excerpt of Kant's categorical imperatives as he actually wrote it Well, it's a translation from the German to the English, but it's his own writing. So this is what we call the primary source, right? Whereas a textbook, what Louis Vaughan is saying you, that's a secondary source. That's somebody using the primary sources, right, the writings of the actual philosophers, to tell you what they mean. So what's cool about this textbook, right, doing ethics, is that it gives you both the primary sources, like the sources where it comes from, the philosopher's words, and then he gives you his own interpretation of that. Right? For the most part, he's correct. I would argue that Louis Vaughan is correct, but there's some instances where his interpretation, I disagree. And not in this chapter. He does a good job in this chapter, but in the feminist chapters, totally disagree with what he says. But anyways, let's move on to the means ends principle. And this is what Kant says. Wait, I lost it. Okay, here we go. So act as to treat humanity, whether in thine own person or in that of any other, in every case as an end withal, never as a means only. The fuck did he just say? Might as well just be speaking in German, right? He may say it again here. So act as to treat humanity, whether in thine own person or in that of any other, in every case as an end withal, never as a means only. And so treat humanity, right? For every action that you're going to take, you need to treat humanity. You need to give yourself this law, this categorical imperative, this command. You need to treat humanity, whether humanity is you yourself or any other human being alive out there. In every case, in every action, in every act that you do, as an end withal, never as a means. So what he's saying here is that don't use people. Don't treat people as means to get you towards an end, right? So means and ends. The means are the instruments, or the tools, right? Or the tools and instruments that you use to get to reach some kind of end goal. So for example, you want to get to work on time, right? You're not going to walk, right? Think of the Maria, right? If Maria walks to work, she will be late, right? If you want to be on time, you will get a tool, an instrument, namely a car, right, or a bus, whatever, right? Something that's much faster, or a bicycle, than just walking your two legs, right, to get there on time, right? That car, you're using that car as an instrument, as a tool to reach a greater end, which is being to work on time. Okay? What Kant is saying here is don't treat humans, whether it's you yourself or any other person out there, as an instrument to get you what you want. Don't treat people as means. Treat them as ends in themselves, as end withal. Never as means only. So what Kant is saying here is that every single individual has equal intrinsic worth. And remember, go back about the difference between instrumental and intrinsic worth, value, right? Kant is saying that humans are intrinsically worthy, but equally. Doesn't matter if you're a king or a pauper, right? A worker or a owner of the factory. Both of them are equally worthy because both of them are humans, because both of them have the capacity for reason. Right? Rationality is the foundation of morality for Kant. So because king and the pauper both have the capacity to reason, they're both equally intrinsically worthy. Their moral status is the same. Right? So again, impartiality. Right? Here, Kant is all about, yes, be impartial. Everybody's equal because everybody has the capacity to reason. Right? Thus, you need to treat everybody as an end in themselves. Don't use people to reach an end for you. Let's see. So autonomy and respect. These are the concepts that he's trying to inculcate into us. Autonomy. Each person is autonomous. Each person has the rational capability to reason for themselves for their own choices. Don't make choices for another person. All right, this is why for a Kant, cheating on your significant other, on your boyfriend or girlfriend, is immoral and irrational. Well, first it's irrational and then it's immoral. right? Why? Because you're using that person as a means, right? You're choosing for them already. You're not respecting that other person's autonomy by not telling them the truth. Right? What is your end? Being a player, I guess, cheating, being a cheater, right? And you're using both people there to reach that end, and not respecting their autonomy. The morally right thing to do, the rational thing to do, according to Kant, if you want to be a cheater, is that you talk to those people, like, you know what? I want to see both, right? And let them choose. That's the crux here, right? These people are rational beings. They should give them the chance to choose for themselves. They want to be in this situation or not. You don't choose for them. That's just fucked up, says Kant. As a matter of fact, another little bit of bio of Kant. Kant died a virgin. He never had sex, well, according to himself and to other people. He never had sex because of this principle, the means ends principle. Because he said, what is sex for? What is the end result for sex? It's reproduction, to produce kids, offsprings. And he didn't want kids. He was just totally enmeshed in his own philosophy. That was his baby. So he never had sex, because if you have sex for another reason, right? Not for having offsprings, you're just using that person for your own pleasure, right? Or both of y'all are using each other just for pleasure, and that violates the means ends principle. Where does the end go? Pleasure. What is the means? Each other's bodies as instruments to reach that end goal, pleasure. So for him, that was irrational and that was immoral. So he died a virgin. Right? The same thing with suicide now here. The means ends principle. Treat humanity, whether in thine own person or that of any other, as an ends, and in every case as an ends withal, never as a means. Right? So as in thine own person, you're going to treat humanity. So what happens when you commit suicide? Or when somebody commits suicide? When somebody commits suicide, they're using themselves as an instrument to end their suffering or their pain. Right? They're using their own bodies as an instrument. They're using themselves as an instrument towards some end. And that's wrong, as Kant. Right? Never treat humanity, whether it's yourself or any other person, as a means. Always treat them as ends withal, as ends in themselves. So because Kant's view is that all humans are rational beings, these persons, they have intrinsic value and dignity, right? Autonomy, right? Rational agents. Every single human person is a rational agent. And these rational agents should be free to choose their own ends, to legislate their own moral laws, and assign value to the things in their own world. Persons are givers of values, so they must have ultimate value, says Kant. So they therefore must be treated as ultimate ends and never merely as means. So equal intrinsic worth. That's why we got to respect each other's autonomies and treat each other as ends and never as means. If you do treat people as means to get you something else, something better for your own end, you're not using rationality, and thus you're not recognizing that each person has equal intrinsic worth. But some people might say, well, what about a mechanic or a baker, right? Or a chef, right? Aren't we technically using those people as means to get an end, right? Think about a mechanic, right? We're using them to what? To fix, to change the oil or whatever, change the brakes. Or a baker, we're using him to make me some bread, right? Or a chef, we're using them to cook for me and feed me, right? What about that? Says some of Kant's critics. And Kant retorts back. It's like, no, dude, like, they chose that profession. A mechanic chose to be a mechanic. And thus, he chose. Rational, as a rational agent, He chose to be a mechanic, and thus he chose to be helping people out, fixing their cars. We're not using them as means. They, as an end in themselves, chose to be a mechanic. They, the baker, as an end in themselves, as a rational agent, chose to be a baker. Right? We're not forcing them to feed me or to bake me a bread or to fix my brakes, right? And we pay them, right, as well, right? But these people, first of all, they chose to do the profession of another. Right? Thus, that means ends principle doesn't really apply to that situations when we go pay a mechanic to fix my car, because primarily they chose that profession. They chose to be there. All right. So yeah, that's me. So these are the two main categorical imperatives, for the two main principles that that are the foundations of Kant's ethical theory of the categorical imperative. So the first one is the principle of universality, right? Universalize your actions. And then the second principle is this principle of the means principle. Okay. And you apply these principles to the action, every act, not to the consequences, but to the action itself. All right. There's definitely some flaws in this theory of Kant's ethical theory. One of the most obvious flaws of this is that the issue of conflicting duties, conflicting perfect duties. So let me give you this ethical scenario here. You're just chilling in your house, reading a book, hopefully, reading a book, and then all of a sudden you hear loud knock and banging on your door. It's incessant. And you stop. It's like, what the fuck's going on? So you go to downstairs or wherever, you open up the front door, and it's your friend, your best friend. And he's all tattered, full of blood. And he has a cut in his arm. What the fuck? And he's like gasping and like without air, without breath. He's running out of breath, crying, desperate. And he tells you, yo, dude, help me. Save me. Hide me. There's this guy with a machete after me. I never met him, I don't know what the fuck is, but he's just attacking me. And you're like, you have a duty to save a life. That's a perfect duty, according to Kant. Preservation of life. So you have to hide him, right? You have to go in and save, give him a band-aid in his cut, give him some water, right? Tell him to calm down. And things are good, right? He's calming down. And all of a sudden, boom, 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 some fucking knocks on the door again. Holy shit, what the fuck it is? So you tell your friend to hide in the closet, in your room. And you open the door, and there's this guy with a machete, with some blood in it. And he's also with his crazy eyes. And he's like, I saw your friend go in here. Where is he? Where is he? Where's your friend? I saw him come in here. What do you do? Right? Here, the Kantian ethical theory is not going to be too useful here. Right? Because you got to follow the categorical imperatives. You got to follow your perfect duties. Here you have conflicting duties. Save your friend's life and tell the truth. What do you do? How do you reconcile those conflicting duties? Kant really doesn't have an answer for that. Right? So this is one of the major flaws of Kant's ethical theory. What happens when we have conflicting perfect duties? Right? Or in other words, it kind of doesn't pass the common sense moral experience test that we have, the criteria we set up earlier in the semester. What do you do? Right? The most common sense to do is to lie to that guy, to the killer, and be like, no, fuck you, and close the door. Right? You're crazy. But according to Kant, you're not supposed to lie. That's a perfect duty, to tell the truth. Never lie. But you also have the perfect duty to save lives, to preserve a life. What do you do there? Right? Again, following these two categorical imperatives, it's not really going to give you a right answer. It's not really going to give you a definitive answer. Right? So its usefulness here fails. I mean, yes, this dilemma here, this scenario, pretty fantastical, right? It's just a thought experiment. I really hope nobody ends up in that situation ever in their lifetime. But it's just a way to explain it, to give a counter argument, show that there is flaws with this so-called rational way of doing ethics. Also, another flaw of a Kantian ethics, right, is this categorical imperative. It's that it doesn't care about consequences, right? That goes against our common sense moral experience, right? Consequences they do matter, right? It does matter what the consequences are of an action. It does matter if it's going to benefit somebody or not, right? It does matter if the terrorist stops killing people and we end up just killing his family. That does matter, right? The consequences do matter somehow. And according to Kant, they don't, not at all, right? So that's also a flaw in the ethical theory. Um, Another thing that Kant fails to account for is the so-called issue of moral luck. Just luck. According to Kant, because we're rational beings and we're autonomous and we should be respected as ends with all, uh, we should be in control of our morality. But there's a lot of factors, outside factors out of our control, that affect the way we conduct our comportment, the way we conduct our morality. This is just what we call moral luck. Right? Moral luck is just this. Let me give you a definition in the textbook. Moral luck is just cases in which the morality of an action or a decision depends on factors outside of our control. If Kant is right, then moral luck does not exist. But common sense experience tells us it does, right? Sometimes we're just in the right place at the right time, or the opposite, the wrong place at the wrong time, right? And that depends on how we act, right? And if Kant is right, such cases won't exist, but they obviously do. Okay? So that's another uh, issue that highlights that this theory is also flawed, right? So there's no perfect theory out here. Each theory here has its good advantages and its disadvantages, right? All right. um, I mean, there are some good things though from Kant, for sure. Right? We could definitely learn from Kant's theory. Basically, like all the important features of what we look for in most moral theories, Kant's theory has it, right? Universality, impartiality, and respect for other people, right? This is what we want for most moral theories or for moral codes of conduct, and Kant does provide that. But again, when it comes to the complexities of real life, when you apply it, these ethical theories fail you. Okay. All right, let's move on to another non-consequentialist theory. Let's move on to natural law theory. I'll try to be quick here with this one. So natural law theory comes out from the ancient Greeks and Roman philosophers, most notably Aristotle. Um, Aristotle believed that every single thing in the universe had a telos. A telos, T-E-L-O-S, a telos is just like an end goal. Everything in this world has an end goal, right? Everything in this world has an end goal. Clouds, what do they do? They gather rain and they drop rain, right? The sun, what does it do? It gives life, right? Everything has some kind of end goal, right? Everything moves towards some kind of goal that nature devised for us, designed for us, before we were ever born, right? So this is what Aristotle thought. And then later on, through theologians, right, these religious philosophers like Thomas Aquinas, especially, um, modified Aristotle's philosophy of natural law theory, of teleology, and applied it to the Christian doctrine. So that's why Thomas Aquinas is so important, because he combines Aristotle, ancient Greek philosophy, with Christian doctrine, giving Christianity its rational backbone. Okay. That's Thomas Aquinas. To this day, the Roman Catholic Church still follows Aquinas' philosophy. All right. So let's focus on the Aquinas version of natural law theory, the religious one, the theistic form of natural law theory, which we'll call divine command theory. So according to Aquinas, God has given us the gift of reason. And through reason, we could find out that everything in the world has a pattern and has some kind of end goal, right? Drop a seed on the ground, wait for it for a couple of weeks. What does it do? It sprouts and it grows into a plant. The plant fruits, drops more seeds, and the cycle begins again ad infinitum. Right? Aristotle and Aquinas would see this, and they would just observe the world and be like, okay, everything has a pattern. And obviously, God must have designed that pattern for us. And because He gave us reason, He gave us a reason for the sole purpose to figure out that pattern, that design that God gave to the whole universe. Right? So everything seems to be rationally ordered. Everything has some kind of rational order in the world. Right? If you just let it be naturally, right? How did the Grand Canyon become? Does anybody know geology here? Just water, right? The Colorado River just started cutting through the floor for thousands and thousands of years until it did the Grand Canyon, right? That's like a rational order there, right? Have you ever played with like water in the backyard, right? And it starts doing little like grooves, like little canals, right? Because water has force and it kind of digs in there with the dirt. If you do that for a long time, you'll get a Grand Canyon, right? This is what we're talking about here, that nature, all of nature has some kind of rational order, some kind of telos, right? So everything in the world is rationally ordered, is teleological, it is goal directed, it is directed towards some goal. Every part of this natural world has its own purpose. It serves a purpose or end at which naturally aims, right? What are our ears for? Hearing. Eyes, seeing, right? And so on and so forth. Every single little part of nature serves some kind of purpose to reach that end goal. Right? And it is our responsibility to discover that design, right, that God gave us. This is Aquinas. Okay? So basically, how nature is revealed is how things should be. How things are in nature is how things ought to be. That's basically the main premise for divine command theory or natural law theory. The way nature is the way things ought to be. Don't mess with nature. So the goals to which nature inclines towards reveal the values that we should embrace and the moral purposes that we should aspire towards. So we're going to be in conformity with nature. So how human nature is, we perceive how it should be, how things should be, including our morality, our comportment as human beings. So what is the nature of humans? What do we aim for? What is our telos? According to Aquinas, humans naturally incline towards the preservation of human life, the avoidance of harm, and basic human functions, animal functions. These include sexual intercourse, raising offsprings, feeding yourself, clothing, sheltering yourself, basic things, right, for survival. This is our natural inclination, says Aquinas. Right, the social truth is also natural for us. Having social ties, says Aquinas, is something that is natural to humans, right? And thus, it is our duty, right, to realize these goals, because that's what nature gave us. Okay. So, according to Aquinas, he says this: the good is to be done and promoted, and evil is to be avoided. Right? That's the first kind of like law he sets up. All other laws follow from this basic premise, that we should promote the good and avoid evil. How? Since good has the nature of an end, and evil the nature of the contrary, hence it is that all those things to which man has a natural inclination are naturally apprehended by reason as good. Okay? So good has a good, right? The idea of good, right? Nature is in that definition of good. So by following what nature does, we follow what good is, says Aquinas. Let's see, what else should we talk about here? So just like Kant's theory, also natural law theory purports, right? They claim that their foundation for this kind of morality is reason, right? But here, reason is being used to find the telos of nature, to find the design that God gave us for nature. So in this sense that it's based on reason, it claims also, just like Kant does, to be objective and to be universal and to be absolute. Once you find via reason what nature devised for us to do, then it's our duty to do that. And that's universal. It's unchanging. And it's objective. So, for example, right, there are certain exceptionalist rules you got to follow, right? Categoricals you got to follow. Right? Some perfect duties, just like killing of an innocent is always wrong, no matter what, according to natural law theory, because it goes against our own nature, our preserving life. The use of contraceptives is also always wrong, because we're going against or interferes with the human inclination of producing offsprings. Right? That's not what God designed nature for. We're interfering with that plan. Thus, that's immoral. Right? This is why the Roman Catholic Church doesn't believe in using contraceptives, right, or abortions. Right? Abortion is a mixture of both direct killing of an innocent person, right, quote unquote person, and interfering with God's design for human beings. That's totally immoral for natural law theory and for divine command theory. Homosexuality, again, absolutely wrong. Why? Because it goes against the nature of human beings. Lying is also wrong. Adultery is wrong. Blasphemy is also wrong. Always wrong. Right? So these are like absolute rules, absolutist rules. There's no exceptions to this, right? So just like Kant's theory of ethics and natural law theory and divine command theory, they're absolute theories, absolutist theories. Absolutely follow those laws, those principles. No exceptions. Right? However, just like in Kant, right, you're gonna arise conflicting perfect duties, right? What do you do with conflicting duties? Natural law theory and divine command theory actually have some procedure to get away, to respond to conflicting duties, unlike Kant does. This is known as the doctrine of double effect. So when conflicts between duties arise, they can be resolved by applying this doctrine of double effect. What is this doctrine of double effect? This principle pertains that an action that has both, this principle says that performing a good action may be permissible even if it has bad effects. Okay? A good action may be permissible, permitted, even if it does have bad consequences. But performing a bad action in order to achieve good consequences is never good. Again, let me say it one more time. This is a principle. This is a doctrine of double effect. Performing a good action may be permissible even if it has bad effects. But performing a bad action for the purpose of achieving good is never permissible. So let me give you the formal, rules for the doctrine of double effect. Number one, the action is inherently, without reference to consequences, either morally good or morally neutral. Number one. Number two, the bad effect is not used to produce the good effect, though the bad may be a side effect of the good. Okay? Number three, the intention must always be to bring about the good effect, even though a bad effect may occur, but the intention was always to be good. Number four, the good effect must be at least as important as the bad effect. So the good of an action must be proportional to the bad consequence of it, if it does happen to be bad effect. So let me give you an example of this. A classic example is a woman is pregnant, right, and she gets cancer. So the doctor here has a tough choice, tough ethical dilemma. Should I give this woman chemotherapy, save the woman, but knowing that the effects of chemotherapy might put the baby in danger and might actually kill the baby? So the radiation chemotherapy. Or I cannot give chemotherapy to the woman, let the cancer develop, and see what happens. Right. But we have, and there's a good chance she might die, and the baby might also die. If we just let the cancer grow, because apparently it's already grown, right? Stage 3 or whatever. Or we just found out she had cancer. It was already well developed, advanced cancer. What do we do, right? There's two perfect duties here, right? We gotta preserve the right. We gotta preserve life, right? But also we might abort, right? Medical abortion here. What do we do, right? So we just apply the doctrine of double effect here. So again, the action is inherently, without reference to consequences, either morally good or morally neutral. So the first choice, give chemotherapy. Giving chemotherapy without reference to the consequence is good, right? You're trying to save a woman's life by administering medicine. Okay, so that passes the first one, first rule of the doctrine of double effect. Second rule, the bad effect is not used to produce the good effect, though the bad may be a side effect of the good. So we're not using a bad effect. So the effect is bad, right, of chemotherapy. It might kill the baby. But that's not our purpose, right? It's just a side effect of the good action of trying to save the woman's life. Thus, chemotherapy passes the second rule, the double doctrine effect. Number three, the intention must always be to bring about the good effect. Again, right? There is the good intention. There is a good intention to save the woman's life, except that there is a bad effect of possibly killing the baby because of chemotherapy. But the intention was there to be good. All right? So that passes. And the last rule, the good effect must be at least as important as a bad effect. So it's to be proportional. And think about this, it is, right? If you do end up killing the baby, at least you save the mother. Right? So 2 lives, canceled out, bam. We're good. Give her chemotherapy. We're in the good. right? God is not going to condemn me for this, according to this ethical scenario here, okay? So the doctrine of double effect is when you have conflicting duties, you apply this duty, this doctrine, right? Is the act good without reference to consequences, first of all, okay? Is the bad effect just a mere effect? I'm not looking for the bad effect. It could happen, it could not, right? The second part. Third part, what is my intention? Is my intention good to begin with, or does it have some kind of bad effect for it, right? And then the fourth one, it's going to be proportional. The good effect and the bad effect going to be in proportion. Right? They got to cancel each other out, basically. So let's do another ethical scenario before we end this lecture here. This sun's going down. I'm getting all dark here. Huh? So for that scenario with the pregnant woman who has cancer, giving chemotherapy is the right thing to do, according to the doctrine of double effect. But let's look back at the terrorist and the military commander that's kidnapping his family as a way to force the terrorist to turn himself in. Sorry, it's getting kind of late now, and I can't think straight. Let's think about that ethical scenario. Let's apply the doctrine of double effect here. Okay? So number one, the doctrine of double effect, the action is inherently good or neutral. So what is our action? Kidnapping the family and killing them to force the terrorist to turn himself in. Is that inherently good? The action of kidnapping and killing a family? Innocent family? No. So the first rule already fails for this one. So let's move on though. The bad effect is not used to produce a good effect. Again, this fails too, right? What are we doing? We're killing some innocent lives to get something good. What is it? The consequence is that we capture the terrorist so he stops doing more killings around the world. But still, we're using one bad action to get a good effect. According to the doctrine of double effect, this is not right. We shouldn't do a bad action just to get a good result. That's immoral. Number three, the intention must always be good. The intention here was right. The intention is to save more lives. But it already fails the other rules for the doctrine of double effect. The good effect must be at least as important as the bad effect. This, you could possibly argue that yes, right? Killing one family is not as bad as having this terrorist killing more and more and more innocent people. Right? But nonetheless, it fails the first two rules, and thus it's not a morally right action to do under divine command theory or natural law theory. Right? So needless to say, a lot of our politicians are utilitarians. Right? They care, right? They don't use, right, Kantian ethics, right? They might use ethical egoism, but most politicians are utilitarian, and we know, right? Look at this, right? This issue here. Is it okay to kill an innocent family just to get the terrorists? This is what we do when we bomb people in the Middle East with drones. Right? I mentioned that in the last lecture. So is that the right thing to do? Depends on what kind of guidance you're using. Depends on what kind of ethical framework you're using. Under utilitarian lights, drone strikes to kill one terrorist member, although you might have 20 collateral damage, other people killed, innocent people, that's going to be fine. Because you're going to stop the terrorists from committing more crimes in the future. But under a Kantian framework or natural law theory framework, that's totally wrong. That's immoral, right? So just keep in mind these things, right? Again, there's no one ethical theory that's going to give you perfect answers for all. Each one has things that are good and bad, okay? All right, so that's pretty much it for this lecture, right? So we talk about Kant, ethical theory that's called the Categorical Imperatives. It has two principles. The first one is the principle of universality. The second principle is the means principle. Right? We show you how it fails with a lot of our common sense moral experiences, particularly with conflicting duties. And then we talked about natural law theory, divine command theory. It was the same thing. You talked about Aquinas and the doctrine of double effect. Right? And yeah, all right. So next time, what's chapter 7? What is chapter 7? Real quick. Virtue ethics, Aristotle. Very cool. Be a good person. Yeah. So next time we'll be talking about Aristotle's ethics, virtue ethics. And yeah, keep up with the discussion. You guys are doing a fantastic job. I'm really impressed by that. And y'all have a good day, good evening, good weekend. Y'all be safe.